Welcome. So I'm going to get started talking about a little bit of the history behind love, relationships as we know it and as we want it today, because it hasn't always been like this. In fact, the types of relationships that we look at as being ideal, that we want to experience ourselves, this enlightened relationship concept is very, very new in the history of humans. So if you think back to the cavemen, it's obviously very different. And so what's the most important thing for cavemen? Well, survival. So that is kind of where the roots of what goes on biologically for us come from. So if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. So you have this in-love type experience, which is what we would consider it today. When you first get into a relationship and your hormones are really high, everything's really intense. Well, back when you were a caveman, that would be very useful. And the reason is because if a woman was to become pregnant, she's going to need support. She's going to need to have a man that can go out and hunt, and she's going to need to have someone to help her to make sure that their baby lives to a viable age, which, is probably a couple years old. So it would make a lot of sense that biology would have wired humans to receive this huge influx of emotions and brain chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine that rush through the bodies of these people that make them feel attached to each other, make them want to be around each other. And so as a caveman, this is really useful because for the woman, what it does is it keeps the man around. So what's interesting is that biologically, even still today, these huge influxes of chemicals that happen during this period last anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. And so what's interesting about that is like what I said, that for a caveman, they're trying to get a child to live long enough with support from the father to be around maybe 2 or 3 years old. And so it would make a lot of sense biologically that we'd be wired for our bodies to be kicking out all these chemicals for that long. But then what would happen, because you're a caveman, is that for the survival of the species, after that amount of time, the chemicals would calm down so that then the man would move on and would end up impregnating somebody else. Now, this is just nature, it's survival, it's instinct, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at where it came from. Sometimes it can be a little bit irritating when it comes to being a human, because at times that initial rush can be very overwhelming for people. And I actually get a little bit more into what it's like in today's time in a different video called Addicted to Love. And it explains a lot. But so historically speaking, that's our origins. And there's a couple other things that we still have biologically that impact the way that we interact with other people of our species in a romantic or sexual nature. And one of those things is scent. So scent back then was very different than now. I'm sure the scents that they were attracted to are things we would find to be pretty disgusting today. But we've come a long way. We're talking about thousands and thousands of years. But scent still plays a role. And why do you think people wear perfumes and colognes? It's because we're still triggered by scent to be attracted to one another. And then another thing that stuck around and has evolved especially recently has been like specifically the desire for a woman to want a man to come home that can bring in the largest portion of the kill. So again, back as a caveman, that was very important. You needed someone who was going to be able to do that. Now in modern times, the kill has changed. It's no longer, a big carcass. A lot of times it's money. Now, of course, it's still a little cliche because we've evolved past that in so many ways. A lot of women do not need anyone to bring them home a kill. But there is still an instinct within a lot of people that is natural because it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. So in some cases, yes, we are still animals. And so all over the world, we still today, even in modern times, have very different expectations and desires when it comes to relationships. And throughout history, everything has evolved from caveman to now. So even today, in one culture and many cultures, looking for that long-term, lifelong monogamous relationship is ideal. But in other cultures, we still have polygamists. Some people live in cultures where their marriages are arranged, And there's a lot of variation on Earth today. So you can imagine throughout thousands of years of human history, there was a lot of variation. But I'm just going to point out a couple of examples of stepping stones along the way that got us to where we are now. So it's probably a surprise to some of you that the idea of romance being involved in that primary relationship is a relatively new expectation. Before, that wasn't even on the menu. People were really just in a place of trying to survive and maintain a household. It wasn't really a factor. It wasn't important. So in modern times, it is. All relationships and all desires for what we want is relative. It's different for every culture, it's different throughout history, and it's also different for every individual. So keep in mind everything that we talk about in this course is not necessarily going to apply to you, and that's okay. And it's not going to apply to other people necessarily either. We're talking about it from a Western perspective in modern times, but it doesn't mean that it's any less good, less true, or less real for anybody else that has a different belief about what relationships should be. And so the concepts that we tend to adopt today, more romantic concepts, actually began in the Renaissance. And so if you look at like Renaissance paintings, it's very romantic. I mean, it's the classic Romeo and Juliet, and the women are like draped upon a couch, and it's sensual and it's sexual, and it's the idea that this romance between a man and a woman is wanted was really revved up during that period. And it's lasted about 500 years since then. But before that, it really wasn't a big factor. So just some interesting bits of information. And so I know I mentioned in another video, I talk about kind of like how do we experience that romance, that in-love feeling today. And one of the things I want to mention is that you absolutely can extend it past that 6 months to 3 year period that I mentioned. Biologically, we still have it turn off, just like it did back then. But there are absolutely things that you can do to keep that feeling going in your relationship long term, except in a better way, because it's not so intense and overwhelming, and you actually can live a normal life, and you're not completely distracted by the person, and you're not obsessed. And there's a healthy way of having those feelings, and then there's an unhealthy way. And really what it comes down to, and the point that we like to make, is that there's a big difference between being in love, which is the word we characterize that initial phase of the relationship that's really intense, versus true love, which can still have elements of that in-love feeling, but it's more healthy. And so just to kind of help you be able to see what the difference might be, when you're in love, sometimes you lose yourself in it, you're not balanced, you're not healthy. And so some examples would be, there's a lot of dependency in relationships that are based on just being in love with each other. A lot of times one person more dependent than the other. A lot of times one or both partners, like they just can't think about anything other than their partner. They're truly like obsessed or fixated. It can lead to a lot of jealousy, it can lead to a lot of fear, because you fear that the person's going to pull away their attention. It's like you're addicted to them. And I get more into that in the other video as well. And there's a neediness and a clinginess that is a big aspect of it. So even though it can feel really good in some ways, there's also these negative aspects that are not healthy. So true love would be the ability to go through that experience where you have all of these intense things, but then, bring a more healthy aspect into the relationship that can last longer term. So for instance, true love is when both people look at each other as individuals and respect that you are individuals. And even though you feel this togetherness, that you recognize that it's not like you just morph into the other person, that you want to keep your individuality. And you also have a better tendency of being able to accept the imperfections rather than feeling threatened by them, saying, oh, this person meets my need, but because they're imperfect, it means they're not going to be able to keep it up. And it's just so much more healthy to be able to understand that neither person is perfect, and not to get glassed over by that in-love hormone that makes you look at them thinking that they're perfect when they're truly not. True love has more balance to it. You're able to be with this person and also have things that you care about in your life. You don't just walk away from your friends. You don't spend all of your time with them and never focus on yourself. It's a more balanced experience. It's mutually supportive. It tends to not have one person more dependent on the other. You're both wanting to encourage each other to grow as individuals as well as grow as a couple. And the relationship is based on want, not need. There's not this feeling of clinginess and attachment. It's a genuine enjoyment of each other. So there is a difference. We're going to get more into it. And just one more piece of information that we get asked a lot about, and some of our workshops that we've done have been about this topic, which is soulmates. But soulmates, there's often a big misunderstanding. A lot of people believe that there's one soulmate that you could ever have in your whole life, and it's like trying to find a needle in the haystack of earth. And that can be very intimidating to people and also discouraging. And so what we've learned from our own experiences, from what we've studied, from people we've worked with, is it's better to think of soulmates more like there's a variety of different levels of soulmates. So you can have someone that you meet that just feels connected. It feels like you know them. There's familiarity, you really connect with them, you're on the same wavelength, and that person could be a friend. Sometimes you can have a soulmate that is in your family, just somebody you feel a deeper connection to than other people that you meet. And then within relationships, you can have a soulmate that isn't necessarily meant to last a lifetime. It's meant somebody who you might have a soul agreement with, that you came here to learn something from, that you made the agreement, you wanted to cross paths, you wanted to have some form of relationship in order to learn and grow together, but it's not meant to be forever. And then there is ultimately like the highest tier of soulmate, which is somebody that is like, you know, you meet them and it's like it's destined, that this is someone that you really truly could live your whole life with, and that you just love from the start. And it really does exist. Joelle and I have that. We've met many other soulmate couples. It really can happen. But to be feeling like there's only one person that could ever possibly be a fit, and that your whole quest of life is to try to find that one person, you're kind of missing the point, because all the other people that you have along the way, in whatever varying degree of connection, whether it's a soulmate or not, they're all there to teach you and also to help you prepare yourself to become ready for the relationship that you really want with your ideal soulmate. So just a note on that, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.